Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to today's Medical Center Hour. Question for you. Have you ever received an unsolicited email from a publisher you've never heard of, inviting you to submit a paper to a journal with a generic but believable sounding name? Or how about a random invitation to a conference abroad or at an airport hotel? If you're like me, your answer to this question could be all the time, several times a week, even daily. Such invitations have become common enough that just in case we're tempted to forego opening these invitations, some now bait our inboxes and our curiosity with patently unacademic words. Just last week, for example, one of my journal invitations ostensibly came from Monica Lewinsky of Bill Clinton fame. Now, these publishers may advertise their journals as open access, and they may promise to make your work visible to well-known indices. They often also claim impact factors, and they tout editorial boards stacked with leaders in your field. All they require of you is a modest fee and author's processing charge in order for them to deliver the lifeblood of any academic career, a peer-reviewed publication. There's just one catch. The journals are fake. These journals are frankly predatory, and to confuse matters somewhat, they're sometimes associated with the broader open access movement. This Medical Center Hour, Predatory Publishing, from fake academia to real extortion in scholarly publishing, tours the strange world of predatory publishing. Our tour guide is Brandon Butler, Director of Information Policy for the UVA Library. He keeps a keen eye on these developments for us and for the institution. But as he will argue, the fake journals and bogus conferences are just a distraction. As he'll clarify, the Academy faces much more serious challenges today as it wrestles with how best to share research and knowledge. At issue here are institutional and disciplinary relationships with the most well-established scholarly publishers and with open access. These matters bear heavily on universities and academic disciplines' core reputational concerns. In addition, they can have very real consequences for individual faculty seeking to report their scholarship in a fiercely competitive academic marketplace and to qualify for and earn career advancement. I'm Marcia Day Childress from the Center for Biomedical Ethics and Humanities. Delighted to welcome you here today. I'm also pleased to report that Mr. Butler has no financial conflicts of interest to disclose. He's merely here to guide us into the realm of predatory publishing. Welcome, Brandon.
Thank you so much, Marcia. Let's see. So, thanks everybody for coming. It's really a pleasure to speak with you all today. Let's see, how do I get my slides up?
They will come up.
They'll come up. Okay, fantastic. So, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about predatory publishing, and I'm going to pull a little bit of a fast one on you, and I'm going to talk about a lot of other publishing stuff that I think is interesting, and I'll see if I can draw a straight line from those things to predatory publishing. But first, I want to talk about my childhood. When I was a kid, I was not raised by Satanists or by Geraldo, sadly, but I was raised in an environment of moral panic off and on through my childhood, whether it was music or the role-playing games I like to play. There was this sense that all these things may be infused with Satanism, and that I may become a victim of his dark movements on earth. My parents, thankfully, were not hardcore concerned about this, but it was in the air, and every now and then I had to sort of explain to Mom and Dad that, I'm still a good kid. I just, I play this game with the dice, and, it's easier than going to dances. So there was the devil worship thing, and my parents worried about that, and we talked about that sometimes. They were also smoking a pack and a half a day, and we didn't talk about that at all. It was so interesting to me, right? This is a vintage, right, cigarette ad. I thought about all I'd read, and I said to myself, either I quit smoking or I smoked true, and I decided to smoke true. My parents were kind of like that, They were concerned about Satanism, but they were smoking a pack a day, and it seemed to me like there was, maybe they could turn their eye from one ball to the other. My argument today is that we're kind of in a similar situation with regards to academic publishing. There are indeed bogus conferences and fake journals, and they are in your inbox. They want your money, they want your time, they are trying to divert you and to waste your time, and it is annoying and obnoxious, and I'm going to try and talk a little bit about that phenomenon and help you avoid getting trapped by these guys. Sometimes researchers are duped by these folks. Sometimes they use these folks to dupe other people, right? This is a handy dandy way to build up your resume. But they have little or nothing to do with open access. That is a core point that I want to make. They have little or nothing to do with open access, and they are marginal phenomena compared to a couple of other really pressing issues for academic publishing that I want to turn to and compare to the specter of predatory publishing. In particular, they are dwarfed by unsustainable business models. These unsustainable business practices of traditional for-profit publishers are actually twisting the academic record and bankrupting the library. Sustainable publishing is possible, but it's going to require coordinated, conscientious effort in the academy. And the library can help, and I'll end with pointing to some of the things we can do to help you make sustainable choices. There is a case for panic, though, right? There was Andrea Denton, superstar librarian here in health sciences, brought this article to my attention just the other day, and it was just too perfect. It is exactly the thing I was thinking might exist out there. Predatory publishing, an emerging threat to the medical literature, right? Two Harvard professors, senior practitioners at Mass General Hospital, published in Academic Medicine, a big, a reputable, well-known, well-read venue, and they say, the health of our medical literature, which is intimately linked to the health of our patients, is facing a serious threat, right? While practitioners around the world use the literature to inform high-stakes decisions, the literature is in trouble. Retraction rates are on the rise. Irreproducible research is far too common, and there is a flood of inconsequential publications, right? Things are bad, and they are distracting our attention from high-value scholarship. Academic medicine must identify the root causes of all of these troubles and quickly implement effective solutions. Right? We are in trouble. Maybe it's the predatory journals. And they say one of the threats to the academic literature comes from its dilution, right? An enormous volume of papers may be accurate, but they are not very informative and not very consequential, and we are inundated with this garbage research, right? Interesting, it's accurate, but it's garbage. Anyway, published and often pushed to readers. So what is this sort of garbage research? What do these predatory journals look like when they're in your inbox? Well, here's one that I got. The Journal of Social Sciences, the Centrier for Excellence for Scientific and Research Journalism, Call for paper, and they have lots of things that try to make them look really important and legitimate, right? There are supported sites. There's just a laundry list. If you've heard of it, our journal is in there. It's indexed by it. Every important place where your work could be found, we're there. We have an impact factor, whatever that is. If you think it's important, we've got one. Have we got one for you, right? So they fill up their solicitations with this stuff. I got one from the conference business is another big one. In addition to journals, you can go present to conferences in exotic places like Istanbul, Turkey, right? And the conferences are extraordinarily wide-ranging. I mean, this is really Renaissance people who attend these conferences. They're interested in accounting, banking, economics. It's all there for you. So it's a wonderful place to go. It's a feast for the mind, as I think Judge Bork said, to be topical. And we got one literally just the other day, Asian Research and Development Wing. Well, let's figure out who are these folks, right? I went to their website, and it's all about the conferences. That's all they do. That is their core business, is facilitating these conferences. They've got them all over the world, any day of the week. If you want to go to a conference, you can fly to one. And I got one literally like yesterday. Got that one yesterday. Invitation letter from China. So these things are fun to mess with, and people have messed with them. They are sort of like the folks who enter into a dialogue with the Nigerian email scammers and then post that on their website, right? It is interesting to experiment with these journal organizers and conference organizers and see what you can get away with. So here's a paper that was accepted by one of these journals. Atomic energy will have been made available to single source. Sounds sciencey, right? There's some balls running into each other and then fleeing in the opposite direction per the rules of science. There is an abstract. The abstract is extraordinarily opaque word salad, right? Atomic physics and I shall not have the same problem with a separate section for a very long way. Which, who here hasn't had that thought? How did this thing come to be? That's one of the best parts of this story. Who wrote this journal article? Siri did. The person who came up with this test started writing sentences with sciencey sounding words like atomic physics, and then just took the autocorrect suggestion from the iPhone for the remainder of the sentence. And so it would say, nuclear, except, and then I've got a paragraph, and then physics, except. Right, so he generated a whole paper with Siri, and it was accepted within a few hours, right? There's your acceptance. Dear Dr. Iris Pear, Siri Apple, backwards, right? Dr. Iris Pear, pleasant day to you. Thank you for your interest, right, in submitting an abstract for the upcoming scientific session, and we are so glad to inform you, et cetera, right? So that was pretty good. But get a load of this, it gets better, right? This is fun. I could just do this all day. Brace yourselves for some profanity. That's part of the entertainment here. That is another article that was accepted by one of these journals. It was an article that was generated by a few scientists for the express purpose of testing journals, right? And they send these things out. Anytime they get a solicitation, they send it out, and it is accepted over and over again. And it is very, very sciencey, only in format, right? Not even in content. I mean, read the title of the dang paper. But if all you're looking for is sort of 20 pages with a 1-inch margin and 2 columns, you're in business. They did include a figure, which I think is really illustrative and helps you get to the heart of the thesis. So of course, right, The Guardian picks this up. I mean, this is fun, right? The journalists love to cover this stuff. It's really, it's wacky, it's zany, and it's a good story, and it's totally fraudulent, right? And the feds have noticed. So the Federal Trade Commission is now investigating this group, Omics International, which is a huge group. I mean, just when I was doing research for this talk, trying to find things like what are some of the highest impact factor open access journals. Boy, if you search high impact open access journal, like the first 12 results are for Omics International. They have SEO'd that term. They are very good at finding people who want to publish somewhere, please, and then selling them what they want. But the FTC has brought charges against these people. They're engaged in fraud. So what is it that's fraudulent about their activities? Well, often prominent editors that are listed have never heard of this journal, right? It's sort of, the Isaac Asimov Journal of Speculative Fiction, and Mr. Asimov has never heard of this journal, right? And so one very common trick is just fake editors, fake journals with fake editors. Another is the falsified impact factors. Those numbers are just made up. They're not generated by the ordinary authorities who generate impact factors. They're just falsified, right? Lies about the platforms where those things are indexed, right? We're going to be in PubMed. We're going to be part of the Science Direct package. We're going to be this. We're here, there, and everywhere. Total, again, just lies, right? This is fraud as it gets. Hidden fees that spring up. This is how they really get you, right? They accept your paper, and they say, well, if there's going to be a $150 author processing charge, and you say, okay, fine, and you walk through that, and they say, there's another $200 open access charge. I don't know, what is that? I thought the APC was the open access fee, right? And so they hit you with more and more fees. It's just sort of classic, not terribly creative, the things that scammers do. They lie to you and they surprise you with with money demands. And then finally, the fraud that's actually kind of in a way most concerning is, at the end of the day, the CVs of the people who publish there. Those are padded CVs, right? These are not legit credentials, but if you publish in one of these journals knowingly, then you're defrauding your institution. And that's really, in a way, what a lot of this world is all about. It's a collaboration between fake journals and fake academics who are willfully working together to secure promotions and positions. Why does this happen, right? Where do all these people come from? One big reason is the publisher-parish incentives of academia, right? I mean, we have to get those lines on our CVs to get tenure. And this is like a pretty cheap and easy way to get a line. The economy of academia wants this in some way. It creates the incentive for this. The other is just a steady increase in the global supply of PhDs. I mean, there is no stopping the global output of graduate schools, despite perhaps less of a need for all of these people and less of a need for all of them to always be doing high-impact research all the time, and yet that is the standard by which they are judged. Developing countries in particular, where academic evaluation is sort of arbitrarily tied to an international publication. And there are countries where you publish in a domestic journal, that's not going to get you promotion. So you have to publish in a journal from somewhere else. But we don't actually look at the journals from somewhere else before we decide that you get tenure, right? And so this, the need to have a somewhere else, but not any particular need to have that somewhere else be rigorous, means somebody's going to provide it, right? This is the economy. And it's easy money, most importantly. And finally, changing businesses. Changing businesses, business models, and changing technology. I think this is a big one. That is, into the breach created and the uncertainty created by real change, and in some ways, as I'll argue later, needed change. Into that uncertainty, these guys step, and they are now soliciting papers in ways that they hadn't been before, offering to publish them in ways that they hadn't been before. And because of uncertainty about the way publishing really works right now and the ways it should work or could work, there's an opening to take advantage of technology like email, like the web, to create scam businesses. It's not the first time. Technology has a long and illustrious history with flim-flam and scam artists, right? I love this guy on the left. That's John Romulus Brinkley. He is a real character. I learned about him from a podcast that I listened to called Reply All, that's sort of about the weird, bizarre history of internet and technology stuff. And Brinkley was a guy who was a doctor-ish, and he developed a practice in Texas, and he built his practice around his radio station when radio was new. And he sold people a cure for impotence. And people heard about this cure on this sort of magical new technology, and it was right there on the radio, right next to the news. And they thought, well, that must be true too, right? The news is true. This guy is coming to me live, 100,000 watts of power, right into my home. It's kind of like magic. Maybe it's real. The email scams are, of course, a very familiar thing too. These predatory publisher emails are just one version of a million different kinds of email scams. As Marcia was saying, right? I mean, sometimes the worlds collide, and you get a predatory publisher who will also sell you Viagra, right? And then we also have the world of fake news, which is a similar kind of phenomenon, right? Where we are in a media environment where things are changing. It is difficult to tell who is credible and who is not. And bad actors will step into that context and take advantage of uncertainty. So how can you avoid these guys? How can you protect yourself from their solicitations? There are luckily some very good tools out there online that will walk you through very quick and easy tests that you can do to avoid getting scammed by these guys. One of my favorites is the website thinkchecksubmit.org. They've got a really nice checklist of different factors that you can apply to the journal to tell, right? Things that will tip you off, right? Take a look at the editors that they list. Go look at the editor's website. Does the editor claim affiliation with this journal, right? I mean, it's stuff that when you think about it, it's obvious, but when you're in a hurry and you've got other things to do, right, it might not be so obvious. So Think, Check, Submit is a great resource that walks you through those kinds of things. There are publisher associations where open access and other kinds of publishers have banded together to say, look, we are the real ones, right? And those associations are a nice signal. So the Coalition on Publishing Ethics, the Directory of Open Access Journals, the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Associations. If your journal is not participating in any of these kinds of efforts, again, that's a bad sign. There's another entity called Publons, which is an entity that evaluates publishers and helps people interact with publishers in different ways. And Publons has also published a list of the criteria that it uses to decide which journals it will partner with, as well as publishing that list of journals that they partner with. And so those are some of the kinds of resources that you can consult to learn a little bit more about who's got a white hat and who's got a black hat, right? So why is predatory often in the same sentence as open access? I want to explore that for half a second here. Open access journals are free online to the public, right? That is what it means to be open access, available online, free to all. Author pays is a common business model, although not a universal business model. Many open access journals do not require author processing charges. But that is a business model, and it is a business model for very well-regarded journals. There is nothing scammy about asking an author to pay rather than asking a reader to pay. In fact, as I'll explain later, it's not a bad model. Open access journals do experiment with peer review, right? There are open access venues where you can go ahead and publish your preprint review, and then people will peer review it later, right? And for reasons, again, I'll discuss later, that's not a bad idea. It helps to cure some of the other dysfunctions in scholarly publishing. It's an important experiment anyway. But these are things that open access journals do, and into that world where authors pay, where publishing is a matter of getting online for free, and where sometimes peer review looks different than it used to, or maybe doesn't exist in the way that you've seen it. Into that breach is the uncertainty that the predatory guys step, and they try to masquerade as legit open access publishers. Jeffrey Beal is a scholarly communications librarian who used to keep a kind of authoritative list of what he called predatory open access publishers. And it may be due to his list more than anything that predation and open access are associated with each other. And the list was a really interesting and useful resource, and it was used by a lot of people for a lot of good things. But if you read some of the other things Beal wrote, it was clear that he was not a fan of open access generally. And I believe that it was part of his agenda to associate open access with predation. And I think that's an unfortunate byproduct of his work, which again was quite useful to a lot of people for a lot of reasons. And again, all of the journals that you see and all of the anecdotes that you hear, these people call themselves open access. So it's hard to disentangle the real from the crummy, and the honorable from the scam. But we know that open access journals can be high quality and high impact, right? Some of the highest quality, highest impact journals in a lot of fields are open access journals, including in medicine. PLOS Medicine and BMC Medicine are in the top 10, right, for the 5-year impact factor in the medicine category. Right? So there's nothing about open access that undermines something's credibility or makes it necessarily scammy. PLOS One, the mega journal model that PLOS One follows, emphasizing validity and speed over the bias to success and novelty, again, is actually a very useful intervention in the scholarly communication landscape. It really counteracts some of the other problems I'm going to describe in a minute. This is a good actor. It's the definition of a good actor, somebody that's really trying to make the world a better place. So I want to try to, I hope that if nothing else, you will disentangle predation from open access as a result of this talk. So should we panic? I want to return to our Harvard friends from the very beginning, right? They issued the call to arms. We are in trouble. Our literature is under attack. There is a deluge of bad science. In the introductory passages of that piece, the authors quote, 2 big editors of big journals to help motivate the notion that the academic literature is in trouble. The first is Dr. Marcia Angel. She's a former editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, right? And Dr. Angel writes, "It is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published." Wow, that's terrifying, right? She did say that. That is terrifying. Why did she say it? It had nothing to do with predatory journals. If you read the article from which that quote is pulled, the reason she is worried is that drug company funding has skewed the research in many areas, right? And she walks through some of the research showing that industry-sponsored trials published in medical journals consistently favor sponsors' drugs, right? 37 of 38 positive studies are published. 36 of 36 negative studies, 33 are either buried or spun, right? Well, it didn't work the way we thought it did, but boy, gosh, look at this secondary effect. It worked in a way, right? So it is a completely separate phenomenon and a separate problem. And the journals and the articles that are susceptible to these problems are the big ones. That's part of what's alarming. It's the prestigious journals. It's the people you've heard of that are publishing bad science in this way. The other quote is from Dr. Richard Horton, from the editor-in-chief of The Lancet. And again, Dr. Horton says, we have to recognize what a growing number of academics are beginning to fear. The case against science is straightforward. Much of the literature, maybe half, is simply untrue. Maybe simply untrue. Again, terrifying, right? Oh my God. When Dr. Horton talks about the literature, though, is he talking about omics? Is he talking about, you know, the Journal of Journal Studies, right? The Monica Lewinsky edited journals? No. He's talking about the stuff that normal scientists write for normal journals. It's a problem with traditional publishing and the way that we all do our work in academia right now. In the quest for telling a compelling story, which you can tell I like to do too, right? Scientists too often sculpt their data to fit their preferred theory. Journal editors deserve their fair share of criticism. We have an unhealthy competition to win a place in those select few journals, and that requires showing impact, novelty, etc., right? That is what's skewing the research and making it difficult to rely on the outcomes at this point. Part of the problem is that no one is incentivized to be right. We are incentivized to be first. We are incentivized to be best, most compelling, but no one is incentivized to be right about something that was, maybe perhaps another way to put it is, no one is incentivized to admit they were wrong, right? Fraud and quality issues haunt traditional scholarly publishing, right? Elsevier published 6 fake medical journals that were created by the pharmaceutical industry. They had published 6 journals that published nothing but articles curated by the pharmaceutical industry to tout the effectiveness and the utility of their drugs. And they got caught doing it and they had to fess up, but they did it, right? Elsevier, BMJ, and Biomed Central published journals about acupuncture. I don't know how you feel about acupuncture, but maybe that's a problem, right? Big deal packages are bloated with these titles, journals that nobody reads. Expensive journals, journals that we're in the library are told are very expensive, but then no one reads them, right? What is going on here? The deluge is coming from big publishers who are padding out these big deals with journals full of stuff nobody cares about. Retraction Watch is reporting an explosion of retractions. Those retractions, again, are in reputable journals. That's why it's alarming. People are not retracting their citations in phony predatory journals. The reproducibility crisis, which is, this is ground zero for finding and talking about that here in Charlottesville, right? This is Brian Nosek, it's the Center for Open Science. That crisis is a crisis because it's, again, research we care about, cures for cancer, and we can't do, again, what they did the first time and prove that there really is a cure, right? I mean, it's really, the reason this is alarming is because it's real science that's being undermined. And on the other hand, there's been studies of these scam journals to show, longitudinal studies showed that this is not a major phenomenon in the US. It looks like a major phenomenon in your inbox, right? It looks like a major phenomenon in your inbox, and when you get caught, it's embarrassing. And when someone you know accidentally submits to one of these things, it's terrifying, right? And when you send a Siri-generated article, The Guardian will write about it because it's cute. But a longitudinal study published in BMC Medicine, open access journal, said predatory journals have indeed rapidly grown. They are putting out a deluge of garbage. That's scary until you realize the regional distribution of publishers and authors is heavily skewed away from the US. Asia and Africa contribute 3/4 of the authors. The US, 6%. The things that are published in these scammy journals are not US scholarship, by and large. 3/4 of the publishers of these journals are not in the US or in Europe or in North America, right? Biomedicine is the 3rd largest field, though, so that may help explain why your inboxes in particular are so full of this stuff and why it was in a medical journal that the call was sent out about this phenomenon. Again, it feels real. It is real in your inbox, but out in the world, not so much. So something I can agree about with the authors of that piece is that one response to low-quality publishing would be to focus on high-quality publishing. But it turns out high-quality publishing is expensive. Access to really prestigious journal literature is hard to get. So your practicing doctor who wants to know the cutting-edge stuff has a hard time getting to it if they don't have an institutional affiliation that gets them those expensive journals. Many physicians turn to journals in part because they're free. A free journal is much more accessible to them, right? And so a solution would be trying maybe to make the high-quality literature more accessible to the folks that need it to do their jobs. So the real predation in publishing is the cost of access. The big deal and serials crisis are real. They have haunted libraries for decades now. Journal prices increased 273% over an 18-year period, 4 times faster than inflation, right? I mean, it is just, we are getting killed by the cost of these journals. For-profit publishers charge 5 to 10 times the cost per citation, meaning, indexing the cost of production to how much of an impact these journals actually have, how often they're cited. 5 to 10 times as expensive for us to subscribe to a for-profit publication versus a non-profit publication. All of that difference is not quality, right? Controlling for quality, we're just paying for their profits. And there is an oligopoly now. The top 5 publishers accounted for 20% of papers in the 1970s. More than 50% of papers today are published in the top 5. UVA is no exception to this ecosystem. We are caught in it. The 4 big deals, our deals with Elsevier, Wiley, Springer, and Sage, crowd out everything else in our collections budget. We spend 43% of our collections budget on those 4 people. The big deals from those 4 publishers eat 43% of our budget. 40% goes to other journals, and then 17% go to those dusty old paper things, right? The books. We don't really buy those as much as we used to. I can localize this for you guys. The Elsevier deal and the medical center, right? Responsibility center management, you may have heard of it now, right? You guys get to pay the library, or better yet, I think we just bill you directly for this one. And so this is not, oh, poor library, I'm really sorry to hear about your budget, good luck with that. This is your money. And it is $590,000 this year for that one big deal. And the cost is just going to go up. We have a 5-year agreement with Elsevier, and by the end of that agreement, we'll be paying $685,000. As over the life of that agreement, $3.175 million, and it's just going to keep going up. This used to just be library budgets, but now it's your money. What better things could you do if you had $3.175 million, right? What could you do? Who could you hire? What kind of research equipment could you get, right? And the profit margins tell you where all that money's going, right? They have skyrocketed thanks to the big deals. Elsevier had a 17% profit margin in '91. They have a 39% profit margin now. probably more, because it only goes up. It has not gone down in that entire time period. They are recession-proof. 2008, they didn't feel it. Springer Science and Business Media, 35%. Wiley, 28%. Taylor and Francis, 37%. These are insane profit margins. This is just profit-taking, right? This is monopoly behavior. It's right up there with drugs and cars and iPads, right? These are some of the most profitable business in other sectors, right? Pfizer is the most profitable business in pharmaceuticals with a 42% margin. Reed Elsevier is right behind them at 39%. Oh, bigger than Apple, right? Apple's margins are 37%. And then we get Taylor and Francis and Springer, and then poor old biggest bank in the world, the Bank of China, can't do as well as Elsevier, 29%. Wiley right behind them at 28%, and the car industry is a piker at nearly 10%. Right? These are extraordinary. And the real kicker of this whole thing is that all this stuff should be free. This is what really drives me nuts. We can talk about whether they should be cheaper, it should be more reasonable. It really should be free. You know, the publishing ecosystem made a lot of sense in 1970. Right? Authors in universities would give their copyrights to publishers for free, as we still do. Editors in universities would give their time. They would peer reviewers would give their time. Again, all for free, generally, the vast majority of cases. Libraries give money, right, to the publishers and buy back. But what do the publishers do? They do really important stuff that we didn't want to do, right? They managed all that paper, all that ink, all those trucks. All that process of back and forth, moving paper around, managing peer review was really hard. Like a lot of things, it's not so hard anymore, right? The internet makes it possible for all that stuff to be essentially in-house. There are service providers that can support peer review at a level that is comparable to the big guys for a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the price. If we invested in those kinds of service providers, we could cut out all those profit margins and reinvest them in other parts of the university. So there are two real challenges to the scholarly literature, right? One is prestige research is too damn expensive. High quality research is very expensive for the reasons I've described. And the other is that journal publishers and promotion and tenure committees have a significance and impact bias. That's really the underlying force that is driving people to publish and publish fast. It is driving them to change what they publish, to bury bad results, to tweak bad results, to make things unreproducible, and so on and so forth. Open access, actually, far from being a problem or a predatory, threat to our ecosystem, has answers to these problems, right? We can decouple prestige from cost. For the reasons I described just a moment ago, right? We could publish things very efficiently, make them free to the reader, cheap to the author, or free to the author, if we take some of what institutions are spending on publishing and spend that instead on the infrastructure to support publishing. If we can decouple publication from impact, right? Again, the sense that everything that we publish has to be novel and compelling. Publish negative results, confirmation studies, sorry about the typo, other less sexy but still important work, right? We have to change the incentives around publication. Open up the whole research life cycle. Make your data, your software, everything you do more visible. All that stuff is not really supported by the traditional system, but it's something that the tools are coming together now, right? There are lots of strategies to promote open access and to try to make this change happen, right? You've probably encountered funder mandates. I know the NIH is a major funder here. Open Research Funders Group is another big entity that's trying to push that shift toward open access. The Gates Foundation, the Heart Association. There are open access policies and even in some places mandates where institutions sort of pledge that all of their faculty output will be made open access. And there are even boycotts. All these things, they're nibbling around the edges, but we're still not getting there. It's slow going. I think some of the things that I'm more excited about are creating more open outlets. Open publishing is coming to UVA. We are investigating journal platforms to support open journals. Anyone here who is an editor at a prestigious journal or who would like to start a new prestigious journal, come and talk to us. We will give you a hosting platform that is sustainable and friendly. We have the Center for Open Science here in Charlottesville, providing all kinds of interesting tools to open your whole process, again, to make everything about your research more visible, more reproducible. There are preprint servers. hugely interesting and useful in other disciplines, and they're starting to get a foothold here in medicine. There's the bioRxiv, which is an open preprint server. You can post your research there for free, and anyone can read it. And it, again, helps accentuate access and visibility. And finally, we have institutional repositories here in the library. We have Libra and Libra Data, where you can make your research more visible. There are lots of local and national resources that are interested in these questions. You talk to your health sciences librarians. They are your experts in-house. Andrea's here in the room, and I know there are just tons of people here who are super talented, super knowledgeable, who'd love to talk with you about all these issues. Again, we have our IR, libra.virginia.edu. Dave Gamandi is our open publishing librarian, and like I say, he would love to hear from you if you want to publish something, start a new journal, explore a monograph. We have the Center for Open Science right down the street, and Spark, who is a major national leader on open access publishing. So, I hope that wasn't too much of a switcheroo for you, and I hope you enjoyed hearing from me, and I think we've got a few minutes for questions if folks would like to ask.
This is fascinating, and I hope that some in our audience have questions, not only perhaps about the fake conferences, but about some of these very legitimate concerns that go right to the heart of our academic system. So when I call on you to offer a comment or raise a question, please identify yourself.
Well, John Steinke. So two questions that came to mind. One, at the very beginning you talked about the dilution of kind of science and the literature and everything with too many journals. And yet then with open access and not peer review, then you're just kind of putting anything out there and it sounds like you're diluting it more. So that's my first question. The second one is, even with these open access journals, a lot of them, legitimate ones like PLOS ONE and everything, charge $1,000 to $2,000 to publish. That doesn't sound very friendly, whereas journals, other ones that I submit to, you'll say probably are hidden charges, but they're largely free. So a $1,000 hit is pretty big out of a budget for a grant. So
yeah, so those are both great questions. So for the first question, I think, though I didn't say this explicitly, I think you've identified a tension, right, a really clear tension between, on the one hand, one of the problems, and like in a way, I think, again, if you read the Lancet editorial, a lot of the studies on reproducibility, studies on the ways that the scholarly literature is influenced, what you see is a big driver that distorts things is exactly what you say, the bias toward impact, and the sense that only the best things should be published and only the most compelling things should be accessible. And so if you want to be published, you should make your work really good. And I think that envisions a kind of, right, an elite system where there could be the best journals, and if you just read those, you'll learn all the best information. And that should be the model, right? We should filter out as much as possible and only get the best stuff. But trying to achieve that model where we're not deluged with too much information is part of what has created all the problems I described. So we're caught in this tension. I think it's at least defensible that maybe we should embrace the deluge more than trying to fight it, and that there is more, we're likely to be better off if we let more stuff get into the open, and so that we're not biasing results, right? So that we're not giving people reasons to change the way they report what they find, and then afterwards sifting through and filtering that stuff. So more things get published, yes, and then we need additional filters and additional commenters to surface things that are maybe more impactful and so on. But we don't want the publishing to be tied directly to the impact, because that's what creates the warping influence that I described. APCs are interesting. I mean, it's a business model. There are some in the scholarly communications world that think it's the right way to go. So if you want to read, more about that, there's an initiative called OA 2020 that is based primarily in Europe. But there are some libraries here in America. UC Berkeley, their Dean of Libraries, Jeff Mackey Mason, is an economist. He is a fan of this notion of author processing charges, And the idea is that if we, rather than paying subscriptions, we have authors pay, journals will compete in exactly the way you described, right? You say, well, I don't want to pay $1,000, I want to pay $500. And journals would in some ways compete for your dollar and sell you access at a lower price. Others worry that authors don't really have that much more market power than libraries. And if Cell wants you to pay $2,000, you'll pay $2,000 because it's Cell, right? So I'm sympathetic to that question, and I don't know that there's like a very good right answer to APCs or not APCs, low APCs or high APCs. I think it's just something we're wrestling with.
I am Robert Chevalier, Pediatrics. I get about 5 to 10 of these fake journal requests per day. And the ones that have an unsubscribed choice, I do that, and that has helped in the past, but most of the ones recently don't have that option. So how do you have to, delete is the simplest thing, which is what I do, but do we have to divert them all to the trash can?
I'm afraid that would be my suggestion. That is, these guys, as I mentioned earlier, they have some of them anyway, and there's a spectrum. There was a wonderful New York Times article that it's in the suggested materials and it's on my last slide. There is an area of gray where some of these journals are not intentionally fraudulent, they're just sort of borderline, and it's hard to say. But for the folks that are just no better than the Nigerian scammer guys, you have to treat them like spam, you know, just like you wouldn't unsubscribe from the Nigerian folks. I saw your head shaking, I'm ready.
I am Vladek Miner, molecular physiology here. I think that you raise several issues, but the main issue, in my mind, is that 50 years ago, science was very elite. Yes, even 20 years ago, if somebody would come here to Jordan Hall at 9 p.m., all labs were full, or at least half full. Now, if you will come at 9 p.m., there are not too many people. So 20 years ago or 50 years ago, science was dedication. Now it's another job. Yes, people would like to work 8 to 5, and unfortunately, there is no way to make science when you are working 8 to 5.
Yeah.
So this is, when we treat that as another job, administration is asking me, how many papers did you publish last year? Yes, this is the basic question.
Yes.
And it's not too important what was the impact of this paper. And I think that, I'm sorry to say that you are wrong. It should be very strong coupling between publication and impact. The problem is how we measure impact.
Yes.
And in my mind, the only way to measure impact is RCR. I mean, something which NIH introduced now, relative citation ratio. And I can assure you that if you will publish in some open science journal, yes, you may have many citations which are telling, I never read such a rubbish as in this paper. Yes, but you will not have legitimate number of citations from lousy paper.
Yeah. I think you identified something really important, and my colleague and friend over at the Center for Open Science, Jeff Spies, is really good at this. If he ever comes and talks to you, you should listen, and we should arrange for him to come and talk. He is a scientist, and he's really embedded in your world, and the theme of his talks repeatedly is that the values of science, like the deep values, the 50-year-old, 100-year-old, 300-year-old values of science require openness. And that it is only the sort of pursuit of elitism and careerism that have intervened and actually taken openness out of the center of the scientific agenda. And so I would argue that you're absolutely right, that it is about a change of culture, and about getting back to a certain professional vision of what scholarship is, that is less careerist and more about pure devotion to knowledge and sharing. But that I think that change leads toward openness and not towards, for-profit closed access.
Thank you, that's a terrific, I really enjoyed the talk, it's terrific. And I too am subjected, I think, to 5 to 10 requests for publications or talks a day, it seems. Actually, so I have a comment and a question. The first is a comment, and this is maybe for other people in the audience that are experiencing the same. This just occurred last week. I missed an invitation to a real scientific conference where I would be a plenary speaker. Speaking at the National Academy of Sciences, and I missed the original one thinking it was a scam invitation. I think I probably auto-deleted it, and then they requested again. I was on service, and I came back to it a week and a half later, and since they didn't hear back from me, they withdrew the invitation. So you have to be careful on what you're calling from your inbox. That's the one cautionary note. But the question I have is I'm interested in the preprint experience and exactly what you see that role. I actually had, as an interior author, we did have go through that process with Open Archive, or however that, however you pronounce that Cold Springs Harbor acronym.
Yes.
It was sort of interesting. I wasn't quite sure exactly what to do with it. Our collaborators at Oxford were really interested and strong proponents of it.
Mm-hmm.
I actually didn't object to it because I felt like our study was not something that was at all easily reproducible, that putting it out before it had been under peer review would not endanger the publication from being accepted in the end. But it was still sort of a funny process of putting something up, and it was picked up, and again, sort of the maybe 2000 and teens era, then we started to hear tweets about it.
Yeah.
So it was sort of a very somewhat uncomfortable experience as somebody that's not a millennial. I just wanted to see if you could comment on that.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and some of my library friends are smiling because I think this is such a cultural thing from discipline to discipline. In the physics world, preprints are like second nature. Everything you do, you put it up on archive. BioArchive and SockArchive, all of these preprint servers are all derivatives of the original archive that Cornell created for physicists. And it's just what one does, and one shares one's work on the preprint server, and that's a great way to find out what's happening. You can get RSS feeds, you can see what people are doing, and I think it's really a matter of each discipline changing its expectations and the ways that it consumes and produces to begin to incorporate these new ways of sharing stuff. So it's foreign because it's foreign, right? It's just something that has not been done in this discipline. And one of the hardest things about all of this is it's just a series of collective action problems, and coordination problems where it doesn't make much sense unless everyone jumps at one time. You have to all hold hands and commit to this new way of being. And it's weird, and it's very hard, and it's very inconsistent with a kind of academic temperament and freedom, right? I mean, it's hard to pull these levers, but if it's any consolation, right? People who do it love it and come to love it. The communities, the physicists love archive, and if you read that editorial in the Lancet, physics is a model that the author alludes to. The title is, "What is the Sigma 5 for Medicine?" And in physics, the standards for significance are extremely high, and reproducibility and so on. The community in physics has really driven itself toward more rigor after a series of embarrassing scandals in particle physics in particular. And so it's just a culture change. I think I wish I had an easier answer, but I think the bottom line is it will take a collective move. And the funders are the ones driving it. As you mentioned, it was a funder, and it was I think that's one way to move things from the top down, is for the person with the money to say, this is what we're going to do.
I'm John Philbrick from Medicine. I've talked to several different editors of journals in the past few months, and I've discovered that they all, both all seem to send the papers that they get out for examination for plagiarism. So what about that as a part of this scandal thing that you could presumably publish hundreds of papers if you borrow it from other people?
Absolutely, yeah. It's that, and plagiarized papers are one very easy way to crank out a lot of papers, and there are a handful of and I love this. I'll give you a little sidebar. My real day job is I'm a copyright lawyer, right? And the things that I'm really interested in addition to all this stuff, is fair use. And thanks to fair use in copyright law, there are tools now that make it very easy to check for plagiarism. They work like a kind of Google search index for existing papers out in the world. And it's very easy for a professional journal that wants to catch plagiarists. And that may be one thing, actually. I think that's one of the criteria that either Think, Check, Submit or PubLawns, you want a journal that is doing that as part of its review process. And there are, Turnitin, I think, is one, Authenticate. We at UVA have a subscription to one of the big ones that folks can use for their classes and for their own journals that they run. So yeah, this is something that technology has made it much easier to catch people if you want to. Some people don't want to.
Karen Knight. Actually, one way to be alert that it may be a bogus journal is they'll often ask you to pay for the services of one of those Authenticate.
Oh,
or
interesting.
that's one of the first things they ask you is you go out and buy that service to do that. So that was one way I was alerted to a scam. The other thing I just want to mention though is you mentioned BEST a lot, and I just want to say that I would feel that BEST is represented by truth or validity, and it's not by the peerage of the journal, because we know New England Journal of Medicine has published some bad studies, some bad research. So if we keep our eye on the ball that BEST equals truth or validity, that should be our guiding star, I think, in any decision or any process we go through. Given that, I think clinicians find it very hard to be good at critical appraisal real time. And I believe that the stakes are higher than physics when we're talking about clinical care. So it's a very messy, it's just even more complicated, I think, in the medical sciences. And I may just feel that way because it's my area. But I think that I'm still a little concerned about group peer review.
Yes.
I think in principle it sounds great, but at some point somebody's got to say, I know how to do this, and I'm good at doing it, and I find these flaws, and then stop it from getting further.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the talk.
Absolutely. Thank you, and I agree, and I think that shift away from, or the definition of best you give is right, but I think you highlight, the exact same tension from the earlier question. That is, if we want to reward all valid or true research, then we do let through a lot of research that may not be as helpful to someone who needs to make a choice in a hurry. And we need new filters and new ways of serving people who need that kind of information. Clearly, the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine are not satisfied that they're doing a good enough job. So we're in the moment of change.
I think that we should be very careful with comparing physics to biomedical science.
Okay.
I am a physicist who moved to biomedical science, so I know little about physics.
You know more about both than I do. So
In physics, you have sometimes in CERN or in Fermilab, you have experiments. 10,000 people are working on one experiment. Yes, and outer list is longer than the paper, so they have to do preprints. Yes, to be promoted or to show that they are doing something. And in biomedical sciences, you have labs where postdocs are not allowed to speak to each other about their projects. So you see that the fields are different. The fields are different, and also you mentioned about this big pharma who are paying for skew the results. In physics, nobody can do that. There is no big pharma industry behind it.
Yeah,
So the scandals are not,
not the
I mean,
same.
we can discuss that in private, they're not completely
Well,
scandals.
it makes me think of another thing that I think is really strange and a root cause of all this stuff is that the law of publishing is copyright. And copyright cares about authorship and creativity, right? Copyright is primarily for novelists. I mean, really, that's the paradigm case of copyright. Copyright wants you to be John Grisham. 10,000 people working on a physics experiment is not John Grisham, right? But the product of that work is a copyright-protected piece of intellectual property that is treated like a John Grisham novel, and it belongs to Reed Elsevier until all of those people are dead, and 70 years after that. It is insane. It doesn't make any sense at all, and that's another big reason that open access is so interesting, and I think a compelling thing to explore, is that it decouples the dissemination of research, which is one kind of activity that can vary in the ways that you describe, from all of the other things that copyright is about, which, again, works in a completely different way. And it is, I think, absurd that Reed Elsevier has the ability to get the same kind of monopoly profits out of a physics article that Warner Publishing has to get out of a Beyonce album. But we treat them that way, and they treat us that way. That is, we the consumers pay through the nose for that copyright monopoly privilege. So I think that difference is a really interesting and important one.
I'm afraid we're at the end of our hour, but I would like to thank Brandon Butler for a wonderful talk, including those insights into the publishing industry's profit margins and our library's budgets, which I've heard about over the years as these charges have gone up. And I agree, these are difficult problems that have an impact in various sectors of the institution. We invite you to join us next week for the last Medical Center Hour of the semester, which is also the Joan Echtenkamp Klein Memorial Lecture in the History of the Health Sciences. We welcome back to UVA Paul Lombardo, who is now at Georgia State University College of Law. He will be talking to us about the continuing relevance of America's eugenic legacy. So please join us here next Wednesday, the 29th. And again, thank you to Brandon Butler.